Hello, hello, hello. Are you still in Korea? South
I
Korea?
am. I'll be here until week 8, and then I'm leaving right after.
Good. What has surprised you the most this visit?
Here this time?
Hmm.
Oh, that's a great question. I never asked that question because I regard myself as a an insider here, insider and outsider. Like, um,
Yes, we know how
but
that
what
works.
surprised me the most within the last couple of years that I was here is that there are just so many foreigners. I was not able to, I mean, I did not speak any Korean for the last um couple of days because there are people like, able to speak English, and my daughter, of course, is her um native language is English now, and it's just people around me, as soon as they see us like speaking in English, and they started talking to us in English. So it's been interesting.
I always wondered if it was truly like the what do they call those shows? I'm gonna give you it's like Netflix, but it's for Korea. Let me see. To watch my variety shows. And I always wondered if it's really if Seoul. Let me give you my show. And maybe you can tell me if it's a dream or reality.
Dream or reality? Give me the title of the show. I'm gonna watch it.
Um, oh gosh, I haven't looked at this in so long. Well, it was called Masters of the House, but that's not the Korean. It's Masters in the House, or loosely translated, All the Butlers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's Lee Sung-gi.
Mm-hmm.
He was a pop star. That's how I came to know him. And then I saw him on this variety show, and I fell in love with the variety show. And I highly encourage you to watch it because I need to know
Uh-huh.
if I have been, if this is propaganda. But in my head, I have built my entire dream of going to South Korea on that show.
Really? I want to watch it. And I'll tell
Mhm.
you what I think about that show,
You can see it
the
on the
content of the
YouTube.
show.
You see it on YouTube. It's so good. Lee Sung-gi. It's like my favorite.
Isungi.
I
Oh,
guess different
Isungi. Oh, yeah,
country.
yeah. Yeah.
It took me a minute because I didn't realize Lee wasn't his first name, so that took me a minute. But now I get it.
Okay. What is the show? What does the show called again? The
It's Masters of in the House is the English
Masters in.
title, and then the
Okay.
Korean direct translation is All the Butlers.
All the
It's
butlers.
been going on since 2017. Watch the earlier episodes, like
Mm-hmm.
20, watch the 2020 season, because I think Lee
Oh,
Sung.
집사부일체. Okay, I see.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
The English translation is terrible.
Okay, it's in entertainment. Yeah, yeah, it kind of depicts the real soul. Yeah, because they do, it's a reality show.
Mhm.
Anyhow, okay. Welcome everybody for week what's our week 6, right? Week 6. Just a couple reminders, and then I'm gonna relay the information. I'm gonna turn it over to the discussion leaders in just a second. But I am going to let you know a couple of things. I had given you the feedback and approval for your topic and the source, right? I know there are a few of you who are yet to submit your topic and the APA. The sooner you do it, I mean, this is not really a hard deadline because there's no points assigned to that. It's just for me and you to be on the same page as to, um, what source that you want to critique on. And I just wanted to help you and support you so that because, the source is important, right? So that's the whole intention of that submission. So just submit that to me as soon as you have it. If you have received my approval, you're more than welcome to just go ahead and start drafting your paper, and the due date is sometime in week 8. Okay. And as you know from the syllabus and from our previous discussions, next week we don't have a class. Okay, we don't have a class, a regular class. However, I will be here in the same very Zoom room, in case anyone wants to come in and chat with me. Okay, so I'll be here for the entire duration of time that we have a class. So, I'll be working. So I'll be here. So just come in and if you need to chat with me. But if not, spend the next week to catch up on your work and do whatever you need to do. And of course, and if you cannot make it to the class next week to chat with me, email me. And I am really, really, I'm really serious about giving you my reply and feedback as soon as possible. I think that's really important when it comes to having like an online class because we don't get to bump into each other like, in a hallway or something like that. Okay. Last reminder for you is I was told that you have the mid-course evaluations in your inbox. Please do fill it out so that we can get a better understanding of what's working well and what needs to work better or differently more. So that would be really wonderful if we could do that before it is due. And then that's all for today. Anything before we get started with today's content? Okay. Okay. It's coming in. All right, discussion leaders, it's all yours. Ernest, Liz, and Samreen are our three leaders for today. They do also have a research panel presentation. So I think they did a good job of kind of like, making it so that those two presentations go hand in hand, right? So they'll start with discussion leading, and then based on what we have discussed through their um, lead, using, based on their lead, and then they're going to let us what to do and what to think about when they present the research of their choice to us. And then, so I'm going to be turning it over to you, discussion leaders, and let me just give you who's going to be doing the slides. I'm going to make you a co-host. Okay, Ernest. Okay, just made you a co-host. Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Oh, the question before we get started, Dana, did you respond on Brightspace? Yes, I did respond. Even some of you sent me emails, others used the spreadsheet, and rest of you used Brightspace to upload your topic and APA, right? Citations of the source, but I had given my feedback all in the Brightspace. If that makes sense. Okay. Dana, I think I'm answering Dana's question in the chat. All right. Okay. We're ready for you, leaders.
Okay, group.
Group.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. So our group is myself, Liz, Emery, and also Ernest. So today we will be your discussion leaders for Unit 6, focusing on intersection of Schlossberg transition theory, social class dynamics, and community cultural wealth. Next slide. Okay. To give you a quick roadmap of our 30-minute block, we will spend the first 15 minutes orienting you into the
recording in progress.
Theoretical framework, and the second 15 minutes apply to the breakout rooms. So we've structured our presentation to be mindful of the time that we're allotted, and also most importantly, so that we're able to move from an individualistic view of transition to a community-based survival strategy. In the chat, you should also see a link that should be there now. That was dropped by Samreen, and that should take you over to the Padlet. And so that also will have some handouts that you will be able to utilize to follow along. Thank you, Ernest. So in our readings from this week from Ames and Garvey, we are challenged to actively unsee the deficit model where higher education focuses on what marginalized students lack rather than the systemic barriers they face. So instead of asking why working class students lack the strategies to transition, we must evaluate the systemic classic barriers the institution places in front of them. So the main focus of the articles was to reimagine the concept of resilience in higher education, moving away from traditional individualistic definitions toward an understanding of resilience as a community-based practice. The authors argued that previous conceptions of resilience often focused on individuals' ability to recover from the hardship, which can lead to deficit perspective, where students are blamed for their inability to navigate toxic or hostile campus environments. Instead, the article explores resilience through the following themes: individualism, community-based, dual ethno, and also marginalization. Next slide. Okay. So how do we traditionally measure students within this framework? Historically, this traditional model has been heavily individualistic. So it assumes that the student must assimilate to the institution and they fail to transition smoothly. The deficit or the lack of strategies is placed entirely on their shoulders. As we see in this slide, we see the connection amongst Schlossberg's transition theory of the 4 S's with Yoso and also Abe's community-based resilience. And as the slide states, to support students, institutions must stop treating transitions as an individual hurdle and start validating community wealth, in which Samreen will take us through more within the next slides.
All right, to ground today's discussion, we'll first start off with Schlossberg's transition theory, which assumes that transitions are not just events, but processes defined by an individual's shifting assumptions about themselves and their world. Schlossberg conveys that a person's ability to adapt to a transition is influenced by the balance of factors referred to as the 4 S's. Situation is the trigger, timing, and individual control over a transition, such as transferring from a community college to a university. Self considers personal demographic characteristics and psychological resources. Support includes family, friends, and institutional networks. And strategies involve coping mechanisms to navigate the change. As we move to the next slides, we consider how these S's intersect with a student's cultural wealth. In Garvey, Chapter 9, we are introduced to Bourdieu's concept of cultural capital, which embodies habits and dispositions from socialization, objectified ownership of cultural goods, and institutionalized academic qualifications and credentials to help explain the unequal educational achievement based on social class. Yoso introduced the community cultural wealth concept, which really emphasizes the assets and the resources in communities of color. So some of the resources that he really emphasizes are the knowledge, the skills, the ability that are utilized to survive and resist forms of oppression. So Yoso's framework really shifts the focus from what students lack to the immense resources they bring with them as they pursue higher education. Yoso identifies 6 forms of capital, which are the roots to help students grow their ability to maneuver through institutions. So in this chapter, or in this unit, we really focused on social class. And one example could be a student might be considered low income by a financial aid office, but by applying Yoso's model, we can consider the other aspects of community cultural wealth that enrich them. So perhaps that student has social wealth through their networks of community support, or they'll have linguistic wealth through different modes of communication, or familial wealth through kinship and family ties, or they'll have the wealth of resisting oppositional behavior, challenging inequality, or aspirational wealth to maintain hope despite structured inequality, and navigational wealth, maneuvering through unaccommodating institutions. So Yoso's community cultural wealth model really highlights that students from marginalized communities can possess that array of assets that are often invisible to traditional assessments. And we can focus on learning how to recognize the wealth that students bring to thrive in their higher educational journey.
Okay, thank you, Samarine. Moving over onto Abe's, though, we really wanted to look at the synthesis of what Chapter 8 brought from this unit. And so building on that, we conceptualized that he emphasizes the community resilience and that we must really reconstruct campus environments to support our community-based survival strategies rather than praising individual grit. Resilience is not just bouncing back, it's about navigating systems that were not inherently built for you. And so while I believe that strength is forged through struggle, when you look at it from a community perspective, it becomes more holistic to be working with others so that it's more advantageous for that resilience to thrive in a longitudinal perspective rather than a short-term success. And so we really wanted to emphasize that the traditional view of Abe's, while it is not as part of the wave 3 that we can see in some of the other readings and case studies, that it's still a part of the foundational perspective that we're moving from individual to collective, and how that can both be linear and nonlinear. And so looking at that through the lens then of Garvey. And so this brings us to the Garvey case studies. And again, like Samarine was mentioning, a lot of this had to do with social class, an invisible lens through which student experience their transitions, whether it's friction with a wealthy roommate like we read, or navigating career services without a safety net. Class dictates a lot of the college experience that most of us have either endured ourselves or that the students that we work with are naturally experiencing on their own in real time. But that also got us to start to really revisit social class versus socioeconomic status. So we wanted to make sure that as we were researching and putting together these slides, that we wanted to look at the misconception of what social class is versus SES. So social class is often mistakenly conflated with socioeconomic status, which only measures a family's income and wealth. A more complex definition that we came up with was from the book within Garvey, saying that true social class encompasses money, cultural capital, prestige, educational attainment. So the bottom line is that social class is so much more than just being rich and poor. And so when looking at the 4S's through Garvey's lens, you can see there's a lot of different things, questions that start to emerge from these transitioning theories that are layered over each other. And then that brings us to our engagement prep. And so we have some critical discussion questions that, while we might not ask you right now or in this moment to answer, we want you to sort of think about as we take a lot of the theory and applying it into this unit, but also into our own lives, because we really appreciate looking back at our previous units as well as our previous presentations and just lectures from Dr. Min, that we're really being asked to not just think critical discussion questions for the sake of doing homework, but really looking at how we can apply it from theory into application in our real life as well as in the material that we're provided. So some questions that have come up are: how does societal norms impact marginalized individuals? Navigating institutional spaces, and how does that complicate our traditional understanding of resilience is? In a specific way, in what specific ways does the social class intersect with other aspects of identity, which is another area that we've already talked about, including things like race and gender, and how do these intersections alter the transitional experience? How can we reconceptualize transition support to shift away from the individualistic fix toward community-based systematic practices? So again, a lot of the foundational critical discussions that we developed for this, we really pulled from what we've already been taught, and then sort of what the Unit 6 is sort of trailing us into later on. So that's going to then lead us into our part 2 with the engagement and application. I'll hand it back over to Liz.
Thank you, Andrea. So yes, we're going to go ahead and dive into 3 breakout rooms for 8 minutes. So when you arrive, just please quickly identify your facilitator, a note taker, a timekeeper, and a share out person. And then Ernest, Tamreen, and I will also each facilitate each room, focusing on unique scenarios. So room 1 will be about social class and food insecurity. Room 2 would be about post-matriculation and navigation, and room 3 is going to be about mentorship and systems gap. And then also, if you haven't had a chance, you'll be able to download that handout that we also placed in our Padlet as reference. And we will be able to break out into rooms.
Okay.
Wow.
I know, wow.
Lucky. Hello.
Hello, everybody. I'm pulling up our questions really quickly. Sorry, my computer decided to go super slow, and of course, I'm the one
taking notes, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I can be timekeeper, if that's helpful. Ernest, were you talking? Because I think you're on mute.
Yes, sorry. I was just saying I was trying to put up the questions in our chat. I'm shifting back from sharing, and then my computer is going really slow. So, of course, the time that I'm selected for sharing the screen. So, okay, so our question was, how do institutions unwritten rules and hidden curricula fail to support the transition of working class and first generation students? This had a lot to do with the Dakota case study. And so if anybody remembers the Dakota case study, it was just that the student bought the thrifted mini fridge, and then their roommate was of a different social class, and the roommate's parents made a comment that belittled and made the Dakota feel insecure about their belongings that they were bringing into this shared space. So that was what we are talking about in terms of this breakout room, food insecurity and social alienation. And so anybody have any comments?
I can dive in, and this is just coming from just an administrative perspective, but I know that in the recent years, I've advocated for trainings because you have staff that don't necessarily know how to identify when a student has, I mean, you have some staff that understand the assignment, and then you have some staff that just, unfortunately they don't point students in the right directions, or they themselves don't really have enough training and understanding on how to actually work with that class or that group of students. And so I do feel like one way that we can support students, or when we talk about unwritten rules or hidden curricula, I do believe that training is necessary. That's just one way. I know there's probably various different ways, but I do think it does start internally with educating.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I would love to piggyback on that. Is that I think it starts with training, but it's not a one-time training. Well, I feel like I've been in the field for like I'm going on 13 years within the field. And even I had this a small slip up last week thinking that I had, crossed all my T's and dotted my I's, but I got a call from like our dean of students saying that I didn't file a separate report when I've done X, Y, and Z, even though I've asked a multitude of times. And so I think that it needs to be ongoing repetitive training like they make us do for budget purposes or anything else, so that we're ensuring that we're not misrepresenting, but like it all comes down to the safety of the student as well. That's the lens that I'm coming from.
And I agree too, Erin. Just one more thing. I agree with that because sometimes we set up trainings and we just do it to check boxes. I mean, like just, really be intentional with it. Because again, to me, I want to lean away from transactional interaction with students. I want to be more, they call them by their names and I know at larger institutions that can sometimes be a little bit difficult, but even if we just put in the effort, lately I've just been trying to practice more about student experience. That's been like my biggest thing is student experience. And I think that does matter. So I do agree, Erin. And not just one-time training, but like, being intentional about how many, follow-up trainings that we have and, practice things that we can do to better serve students at this capacity.
So I would like to add on to that. I think in regards to the focusing on the student experience, I think about institutions that I've been a part of previously and the ways in which various departments within campus life, as early as admissions or orientation or residence life, right? How do all of these different offices, wellness and health promotions, how do all of these different offices align their strategies so that when students are onboarding into the campus, they have a better understanding of what resources are available for them, and that those resources are shared at the onset rather than waiting until it's too late, right? So it's more proactive in the approach. Um, and so you then are able to track that level of engagement, right? You're able to see how many students are actually utilizing those resources like the food pantries on campus or different things like that, so that you're able to tailor the services more effectively. And so I think in in tandem with the trainings that faculty and staff would be receiving, it's also helping to communicate what those resources are so that they are then able to be ambassadors or messengers around what those programs are so that students are able to access them.
And not to be nitpicky, but I would love to be able to, I completely agree with what you're saying, but I'd love to know those stats and numbers, not so that people get pats on the back, so we can understand how we can have more resources and how offices are underutilized, um, or overutilized essentially, and where we can make more effective change. I've been in too many meetings where it's like this was just for a pat on the back and not necessarily for the betterment of the student experience.
I really love Christopher is going in the chat. Just the starting with training for students to identify if they have a food insecurity and what to do to normalize anyone can experience it. And then I think, Christopher, you said transparency about the institution's position on helping with insecurity.
I
Visible
add that especially for like religious or faith-based schools.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, that's a you problem, not a us problem. And if you know that up front,
Mm-hmm.
like community colleges not having housing, that's a you problem, not a us problem.
Interesting you say that too. I feel like some community colleges, not all, but I'm learning and hearing that some of them are actually going towards having like housing
Mm-hmm.
for students, which I find very cool because I remember back in the day when I did work at the community college, that used to be such a big topic because it was like, oh, it's so expensive and that's real estate. And like they never really tried to come up with the solution. They just was like, no, we can't do it. So I think it's pretty cool that some community colleges are going towards offering housing to address the housing insecurity.
I think also to tack on to that, I think that it is, I mean, from my perspective, I really feel that maybe more so at my university, but with faculty and then some staff, it's really unbeknownst to them that we have students who are unhoused and displaced, besides just beyond the food security. And I think also normalizing and speaking with them about um, those those areas in which we need to provide more access, but also when we were talking about even just people in the workforce being able to support what transition those students are going through, um, I think is really, I don't know, I would want to touch on that too. I think that some people, there might not be a little bit naivety there and not knowing.
Oh, I just I, I just have a concern. It's like I don't necessarily feel like the staff is really lack of training because we have so many trainings, extensive trainings for the faculty and staff annually. That I think, well, for me, the challenge is more like it's not always lack of training for staff and faculties, but rather how effectively the information is communicated to students and whether students remember it or when they need it. The students receive massive information in orientation, but what about after orientation? They barely remember anything. They barely remember anything. They may not remember the details about like the food assistance, the house resources, or whatever the policy is until they are actually facing a problem. I think there is a gap. Mm-hmm.
It makes me
Mm-hmm.
We call that cognitive overload.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we're dumping so much on students because we just want to get the information out to them and we want to get them, what they need. And you're right. And the retaining of that information, because I can say working in financial aid, we can come to orientation or my staff can go to orientation and say so many different things till they're blue in the face. And then we'll get follow up the next week, like, asking the same questions. And we'll ask them at orientation, like, hey, do you have any questions? Do you want to, and we don't really get what we need. And then, just like clockwork, the following week, we'll get phone calls, emails, we're inundated with questions. And we're just like, well, what's going on? What's the disconnect? So I do agree with that.
I was just going to add that I think I added a bullet point on, alternative means of messaging and information sharing, because I do think like, incoming first-year student may not find themselves in this situation, right? But maybe they do. But then also fast forward, maybe the circumstances change and maybe they weren't experiencing it in their first 2 years, but now they're a junior and their situation has changed and they are, right? And so, I don't know that it is necessarily the responsibility of orientation programs to be the ones to have to sort of solve all those issues at right at the beginning. But I think about like how do we incorporate consistent messaging throughout the year in passive ways or in other active ways through various programs that are happening across campus or the types of lectures that students are experiencing in classes, right? Like, are there tie-ins that can help to present certain information in a way that is accessible and like that they're able to retain in the midst of all the things, regardless of where they are in their journey, rather than anticipating that they would need to retain that information from the minute that they arrive on campus until they leave, right? So, and knowing, and we all know that Staffing is not always consistent either. So if students have a certain relationship or comfort with one employee, and that employee leaves or is laid off or whatever the restructuring is, the fancy restructuring of that moment in time is, then like how does that potentially either further perpetuate the problem or create additional obstacles that they may not have anticipated? So those are just some of the things I was thinking about. I did share the link with folks in the chat so that whoever is going to share out has access to it. But hopefully if I missed anything, feel free to add all of you have access to.
Fabulous job, DeAndre. You always are on top of the notes.
I know that's right, because I don't like to speak out loud in class. I'll speak this longer, but I hate being the person that gets called on to share out like publicly.
I can share out if no one else wants to do it.
I'm obligated to if none of you choose to, so.
Dana, you have my vote of confidence.
Yay! Thank you.
Dr. Min didn't also tell us, like, if I leave, if we all leave. I haven't gotten one of those, like, pop-ups because I think I'm still co-hosting, so I assume... Oh, did she just join? Hey, Dr. Min, I was just talking about you.
Yeah.
Are you ready for us to go back to the main room? Yeah.
Yeah, I was waiting for somebody to give me the cue. Okay, so you're ready.
Okay.
Let's go back.
Recording in progress.
Everyone else had a lot to say, I guess.
Yeah, very engaging discussion in all of the rooms that I visited. Ernest, you didn't by chance look at my slides ahead of time, right? Because your slides and my slides looked pretty similar, so I had to do a lot of revisions after that. I'm just complimenting about your.
Oh, thank you. It was a group effort.
Discussion leader. Of course.
Hi everyone, welcome back from our breakout rooms. Ernest is going to reshare our slides and then we'll have each of the rooms quickly have somebody share some of the discussion that you guys had today. So we are in slide 13.
Oh, is that me? Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. All right, so if you can go back to slide 13, just so everyone can kind of see what the other topics were. All right, and if somebody can share from breakout room 1 what your group discussed and key takeaways.
Absolutely. For the sake of time, I'll just give a brief overview of what we talked about. So my group was DeAndre, myself, Aaron, Christopher, and Yang. And we concluded with, so how did the institutions unenrolled in hidden curricula fail to support the transition of working class and first-gen students? And what we all just came to an agreement on is that the use of data and not having data be used as a pat on the back for informing and impacting continued investment. We need more transparency about the institution's position on helping with insecurity and the need for physical service connection points for online and in-person students. So overall, just being more intentional on an admin standpoint. And how can practitioners build proactive systems to address critical physiological gaps, such as food and housing insecurity, so that students do not have to rely entirely on individual grit? We said ongoing intentional training that moves away from developing transactional relationships with students. So I don't know about you all, but I know for me, I'm just, trying to get away from that transactional feel with students and more about student experience. So we were just talking about focusing on that experience for students, thinking about the resources that are included as part of the student experience and how they collaborate to provide access and awareness to students and their families to address these needs, training for students too, identify if they have food insecurity and what to do, and to normalize anyone can experience it. And extend out, and also what was brought up too was extended hours for non-traditional attending students, and alternative means of messaging and information sharing.
Wow, it sounds like that was a really great, robust discussion. You guys had some really great takeaways. We'll move on to room 2 if Ping wants to share.
So we talked about policy matriculation navigation. First starts with outreach, getting to students. Then how do we retain the students through matriculation, and then career success, preparing for post-graduation. We talked about how students, especially those who are disadvantaged, they lack resources, how to get jobs after college. So institutions should have a good way of incorporating career centers to help students, give them advice, focusing on necessary skill sets that are not usually taught in classrooms, such as dressing professionally for different occasions, how to network, how to speak and respond to certain questions during interviews. These are not taught in classes or so to have seminars or one-on-one career counseling sessions to prepare students for success. They may have a degree upon graduation, but many will still lack the social capital, the networks, and internship experience of their peers if they come from low income or first gen backgrounds, because they have not been traditionally taught certain ways on how to socialize. Uh, in some ways, it's about how teaching yourself how to network upwards, socializing upwards, and speaking in the manner of the professionals in a certain field, using their language, using language that can help them gain the social capital to succeed after college.
Yeah, thank you. And, just to add to that a little bit, one of the other important topics that or points that were brought up was just really leveraging the cultural wealth or the cultural capital that students have as well, right? So when they are thinking about ways to really build, their experiences, they can also leverage that. And then also, as you've mentioned, just kind of thinking about the unwritten rules and the networks, right? And how students can kind of leverage their peer networks, right? And their campus services to help them become more prepared for different positions. And then we'll move on to room 3.
Sorry, I just want to give a quick plug. A quick plug to Handshake. If no one's on it, USC does a really good job of connecting people to a lot of different opportunities, not just for employment, but like Ping was saying, and like this room was mentioning, I get emails from them all the time. And even though I'm not in the LA area, it's nice that they put on workshops virtually in person for a variety of different career experiences pre-graduation. So just wanted to give that a quick plug.
Thank you, Ernest. All right. And then we'll have room 3 do a quick share out as well.
Right. So this is our room, and we kind of talked about 2 questions. The how does the structure of the mentorship program weaponize the hidden curriculum against low SES students, and also what specific institutional policy shifts are required to shift the systemic gaps so working students are not completely priced out of high impact practices. And we focused on that second thing, institutional policy shifts. And we talked about the idea that you need to rethink or potentially reconsider the way the program is structured. So in many cases, so this is talking about apprenticeship and faculty mentorship programs that require unpaid lab hours, meetings between 9 to 5, and so rethink how necessary that really is for the purposes of the programs. Potentially it is, but like it's a good starting point. Paid internships or stipends are important and require obviously getting funding. There needs to be some financial support for things like that, but that can mean many different things like paid internships, TAs, lab technicians, which can encourage people to stay within the educational sort of framework, and so they're not being sort of pulled between 2 different worlds, the educational world and the financial job world. They're kind of staying in that university sphere, and so they're not having that tension in their life. They must remain student friendly no matter what kind of students we're talking about, and uncomplicated and flexible enough to support student employees as they kind of work through that process. So we talked about one example of an alumni who donated money to an academic program to support transfer students, and that went to paying for student support and transfer student support. And another example that we discussed was the final class in a major, where that final class was a bit like this, kind of an internship in this example, where the majority of students were student athletes, and then you need to rethink the structure of that, because if everyone is doing doing athletics, like at a specific time, and you can't also have the crucial sort of internship during that time, because again, you're introducing tension between the student and athlete side of people's lives. And so maybe moving it to the fall instead of the spring, that kind of thing. The final thing we talked about is flexibility in terms of like asynchronous lab hours or offering evening weekend hours, time blocks that support parents who might have to support their kids either in school or parent-teacher conferences or student athletes and things like that. We talked about thinking outside of like the traditional framework, where maybe the schools provide support like childcare, gas money, that kind of thing, in order to make sure that students are incentivized to stay within the educational world. And finally, making sure that non-traditional students take up the same space and play the same role in the program as so-called traditional students. In other words, they're not less than or supplemental to the students who are able to do 9 to 5 schedules, but this is the program and it offers support for all of our students, that kind of mindset.
Yeah, thank you, Josh, right, on sharing on behalf of your group, right? And it sounds like you guys had a really robust conversation just to really identify what are the barriers that exist, right, in your existing work environments. And then also, how can these spaces be redesigned, right, to consider some of these factors as well. Thadisha, did you have your hand up?
Oh yes, I did. I just wanted to add because I was one of the advisors that I experienced having that finalized program or that class that was needed for a certain major. I just want to say that there was a huge pushback that we got just because it looked like we were showing favoritism, to student athletes just for moving the class. And so I think what kind of helped show that, hey, like this isn't a favoritism type of situation. We really had to show like the numbers and data of like, hey, the amount of, students who make up this program, are student athletes. So to accommodate them, that's kind of like how we had to kind of, shift a few things within that major to ensure that the student athletes had fair access to the internships opportunities. So I say that to say sometimes, majority of the time, data is something that's going to be really crucial, and numbers and things like that, to really, you know, make these changes and create change as well, to support.
So thank you for that really relevant example, right? And we'll move on to the next slide to kind of try to wrap up some of our breakout room debrief. Right. So you just gave us a wonderful example, right, to transition into this, right? Helping today's college student, right, to really validate the community wealth, actively recognize who are the students, and affirm their non-financial assets that they're bringing to the campus. And really thinking about community networks, right? So the student athletes, that is a specialized population of students, and really thinking about ways to share or eliminate that burden, right, for their academic achievement. And then to think about, right, how can we apply Schlossberg's 4 S's, right? So thinking specifically about the support, right, and the strategies to really help our students. So thank you for that. And then we'll transition to Ernest.
Okay, so we already provided the link to our to the Padlet for this class. All the handouts that we had, that I think Dr. Min had also already put up in the announcements, you can find there. We tried to really just condense down a lot of the material that we also included for the sake of just really conceptualizing what we've learned so far up to Unit 6. So there are some things that we pulled on, like patent, even though it wasn't a part of this reading. So all of that you can find in the handouts. The QR code is also, it can take you there. But we really wanted to wrap up the debrief by going back to how each of these units seem to be very intentional, really making sure that we are understanding piece by piece what a systematic class barrier looks like, how community cultural wealth can compensate until a bridge is sort of built to get over and overcome that inequity. But you notice that we can't fully untangle systematic or class or socioeconomic status, all of those things, without really focusing on other aspects of our identity. And so you can see how that takes us into Unit 7. So for those of you who are doing Unit 7, good luck with that. I hope we did a good job of propelling you forward with the racial and ethnic identity models. It really did help us to go backward and kind of look to Unit 7 to really focus in on how Abe's and Garvey were able to help us understand cultural community wealth, social class, and just community in general, and how we can utilize them as tools in the interim of having long-term solutions for the issues that may emerge from them. So we wanted to end by just synthesizing the information. We really like this quote. So by centering community cultural wealth over individual grit, we challenge the classist foundations of higher education, moving the burden of success from individual survival to community liberation. And so we thought we would just leave with that, so that everybody could start to prepare for our next section of tonight's class, but also really just take away what we felt was the foundational aspect of Unit 6. And of course references, because we're in college, so we need to have a reference page as well, if you're interested in any of the things there. We also did pull from some of the optional reading. So if you heard Yoso a lot, or if anybody read any of the Strayhorns or other or Bentron, those are all some of the optional readings. We did incorporate them into tonight's lecture as well. And that's it.
A big round of applause for the discussion leading part of their presentation. Hey, thank you. Thank you. You stole my thunder, but I'm grateful for that. All right. Are you ready for the second half? For the next part of your presentation?
Back to back.
Yeah,
Good?
let's plow through it before the break.
Yeah.
And then I think this is going to be a good, nice transition and segue into your presentation.
Okay, let me reshare. Okay. Good, everybody can see? Okay. So tonight we are going to be going over Beyond the Battlefield using veteran critical theory to understand veteran students in higher education. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Ernest Lopez, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Samreen Yandra.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Liz Yando.
All right, everybody. So what we are looking at today in our research is we wanted to make sure to really just make a really structured area at first to go through and look at the deficit assumption, the ignored asset, and the core conflict, just to keep it real simple with the bullets that basically are the foundation of our research. So our research focuses specifically on veteran students, and we wanted to understand them from a perspective that we believe was helpful to lay over on to additional theories to look at what their experience and what transition looks like for them in higher education. So the baseline here, we are looking at the Schlossberg's transitional theory. So you can see here, as was mentioned, situation, self, support, and strategies are all part of what we traditionally measure a student's ability on coping with change. And when we look at it from that perspective, we can see all of the different parts of the puzzle pieces fitting perfectly together, with the assumption that everyone who's being measured in that traditional sense has the same capabilities of being able to move forward in transition, whether it's in a linear or nonlinear format. But when we really look at that, we really tried to ground our research in the 4S's and the mechanisms of transition using Schlossberg's theory. But you can see that the puzzle pieces, when we look underneath further, they're not always as succinct or as put together as one might think. So the fractures, so the critiques of the traditional theory when placed on top of our research with veteran students, where do traditional individualistic wave theories fail the veteran population? That was a big core of the research that we were looking at, and how the transition out of military personnel into higher education, how that laid over with the 4S's themselves. And as we continue to do research and look at our sample size and our population, we did start to notice some of the cracks in the theory that weren't as prevalent or as relevant at the beginning when we first laid over all of the information that we gathered. And so when we're looking at hyper-individualistic lenses, we're assuming development happens in isolations, fundamentally ignoring deeply communal and interdependent cultures of military service. And the classist and structuralist blindness assumes equal access to institutional support systems, fail to account for systematic, environmental, or bureaucratic barriers, which in the military perspective on its own has a lot of bureaucratic policies and procedures. And then when you lay over higher education on top of that, it starts to not only get compounded, but it starts to lose the student as the center core of the purpose of higher educating veteran and assimilating them back into civilian life. And so the assimilation trap, being the bottom piece, places the heavy burden on the adaptation entirely on that student. So when you have too many policies or procedures that are either compounding on top of each other, conflicting with each other, or have multiple directions in which a state level, a federal level, an institution itself, you really lose that student and then force that burden to be placed on their backs. And it really is about the institution not putting their best foot forward to support someone who's in need of not only support services, but to also gain the educational experience that they're paying for. And so what are some of these assumptions? So a new paradigm, so veteran critical theory, shifting the focus from what veterans lack to the cultural wealth that they bring. And so the deficit model, again, bringing up community cultural wealth, and then incorporating that with veteran critical theory. So building on that CCW, we're looking at how we can reframe their capital, just as Yoso challenged the idea that marginalized students lack the social capital. The veteran critical theory challenges the deficit narrative of the veteran student. So validation over assimilation, that was a really big area that we tried to focus on. Military experience is not a barrier to overcome. It's a profound asset to leverage in an academic space, especially given the life experience that a veteran student can bring into a classroom, literally world experience, in addition to what they were provided within their time in military service, in addition to their own life experiences that they bring on top of that. So then the system or systematic accountability. So we're really wanting to show how we are transitioning from individualistic situation that really forces the institutions to evaluate how they create, destroy, or just don't even support spaces for veteran communities to flourish. And so that was really our core research aspect, was to not just look at veteran students in the deficit model, look at what they bring, the cultural capital they bring, the social capital they bring, and how that is diminished in a system that wasn't not necessarily made for them, but wasn't able to adapt with them, forcing the student to then adapt for themselves.
All right, thank you, Ernest. So to build upon our conversation, this comparative matrix highlights the considerations through the lens of veterans critical theory when applying the 4S's. So when veteran students are transitioning to the higher education environment, VCT recognizes that the veteran students occupy a third space because they are no longer fully in the military, but they also don't fully feel civilian either. So veteran students are often balancing multiple identities while navigating an education system that was not built for them. So if we think about the situation, the transition really focuses on the cultural dissonance between the norms when they were in the military versus the academic norms in higher education. For self, the veteran identity is intersectional, and that's something where students are kind of trying to define for themselves what that means for them. Support is really important. Many campuses have veteran resource centers, and this is where the institutions can kind of really look at what are they doing with these resource centers to really provide support that is valuable, and strategies. So students that are veterans, they might want to think about strategies to navigate the institution and any systematic barriers they may face. And the next slide, we'll be sharing a little bit more about our research goals. So as researchers for this study, we wanted to answer 3 critical questions. How does veterans critical theory accurately explain the lived experiences of student veterans? How do veterans utilize peer networks to survive and navigate higher education structures? And how can higher education leadership move beyond surface level veteran programs to foster genuine structural support? So our goal was to better understand the lived experiences of student veterans, and the research questions included how do students veterans experience the transition to higher education, and how do their peers influence their persistence and development? And the methodology for the study was a qualitative, narrative-driven approach that focused on marginalized voices. All right. So this was a study that really focused on having data from post 9/11 veterans that represent the largest influx into higher education since World War II. And this was a qualitative study that shifts the analytical focus from a deficit approach of what is wrong with veterans to institutional and environmental critiques. And as part of this study, we really focused on ways that students can think about their camaraderie as wealth and thinking about the results from those narratives. And the narratives really focused on the peer networking. And one of the key findings was buddies is navigational capital, which kind of builds upon the cultural wealth that we were talking about earlier, right? So veterans survive and thrive not always through formal campus channels, but through deliberate camaraderie and alternative ecosystems. So there might be shared experiences that veterans bond over that institutions cannot synthetically replicate. And then thinking about the college grid, like how does a person who is in the military environment now navigate the higher ed environment? And we really like this visual because it focuses on the veteran student, it centers the student, and thinking about different buddies, right, that they might have. And these different buddies might link the student to other campus resources and that will assist them, right? So for example, you might have one buddy that will link you to financial aid and advising and mental health and career services, and another buddy that may also link you to other similar services, and then another buddy that may bring up some of the same or different services. And that really expands the peer networking connections and also emphasizes to the students what are the resources that would be helpful for me to utilize as a veteran student as I continue higher ed. And there are a couple of things that we wanted to focus on. This qualitative analysis revealed the academic success for student veterans is deeply tied to the social and communal anchors. So that really focused on the role of buddies. So to have those important relationships to encourage each other, camaraderie, so the shared cultural understanding of not feeling isolated after leaving military service, but also becoming assimilated into the academic environment and discovering purpose. Because military service provides a clear collective mission. So now you need to find a new mission and motivation in higher education. And I will transition over to Liz.
Okay, thank you, Samreen. So as we head towards the conclusion of the formal presentation, we want to offer our evaluation of the Veteran Critical Theory, VCT. The greatest strength of VCT is that it brilliantly rejects the deficit model, and it forces the institution to take accountability and empowers the unique cultural wealth that veterans bring to the campus. So some of those strengths are listed here as dismantles the deficit mindset, where it radically empowers the student by reframing their primary struggle from a personal failing to a systemic friction. And the other one was highly actionable for practitioners. It provides clear, immediate frameworks for students' affairs professionals to justify funding for dedicated veteran spaces and peer mentorship programs. Next slide. And then in addition to our strengths, we also want to make sure that we highlight the weaknesses of VCT. So VCT's weakness is that it's still an emerging framework. Its core tenets require much more empirical testing, across diverse institutional types, like community colleges versus elite private universities, to fully capture the nuances of the veteran transition. Some of our findings highlighted a critical distinction. True camaraderie does not happen just by putting veterans in a room together, which is that buddy system. In the military, camaraderie is forged through a shared unifying objective. We found that the buddy system only works on campus when veterans are united by common goal-oriented purpose, which is very structured in the military with that mission focus or mission oriented, which also stems into that buddy system or purpose driven. Next slide. Identifying who is included and who is left behind. So as we can see, our targeted group that has been included, which is the post 9/11 students, individuals who are actively navigating the friction between military socialization and civilian academia. But we also want to make sure that it's important that we identify the ones that are also left out. So we also have our women veterans, our dependents, spouses, and intersectionalities. It's very important that we keep these individuals in mind as they are also part of this journey. Next slide. Unanswered questions and future horizons. So looking at the steps ahead, many questions remain unanswered. Additional empirical research is desperately needed to investigate how the third space differs based off discharge types, like retiring after 20 years versus serving a traditional 3 or 4 year, as well as those that have different types of discharge statuses. And we also need studies that explicitly focus on diverse institution settings, and also our female veterans. And then should be going towards our last slide. So the impact on our practice. So how does this impact our practice? Institutions must stop relying on empty physical spaces like generic veterans lounges and assuming the community will magically happen. For veterans, to help today's students, practitioners must intentionally design purpose-driven wraparound services that organically connect veterans with counseling and career services. And then leading to our final slide, this is one of the slides that we wanted to implement here. The ultimate responsibility of a higher education is not to force marginalized students to build their own bypasses out of camaraderie and grit. Our mandate is to identify the systemic cracks, dismantle the structural barriers, and build a bridge sturdy enough for every intersectional identity to cross. And then these are our references. And then that concludes our 15-minute, I think we went over a little bit, our presentation, but we wanted to use our remaining 10 minutes to open the floor for any Q&As.
Wonderful, right on time. You do have your first question in the chat from Christopher, if you want to address that.
Okay, that's a
Anthony,
good question.
yeah.
It looks like Christopher asked, how could this be used for veterans who do not want to be included or known as veteran students? This has happened on my campus. That's a very good question. Students self-identify if they're not using their GI post 9/11 or any types of federal benefits that they get from the military service. If you do not want to identify, that makes it a little more challenging to fit into the concept of what we were researching for this particular population. However, that doesn't mean that students couldn't be offered different types of support programs and or services that could tend to what our populations that we're targeting specifically for these veteran students, whether it's camaraderie through the buddy system and or utilizing veteran spaces should they be on a campus that the students at. But you are absolutely correct. Some students do not want to be identified as a veteran student. For all intents purposes, that's their free will to do so. However, that does put them in a further niche of marginalized population that isn't exactly tended to, because we can't provide a service to a student that we don't have an identification for. Unfortunately, sometimes funding can be one of those metric systems that we have to lay over the type of research and services that we provide to students in order for us to be continuously funded. And so while they do have the right to remain or to not disclose their veteran status, that does put them in a little bit more of I would guess a backseat in terms of the support that they may need if they need it, because some of the findings, not all students, not all military veterans who were transitioning into civilian life back into the world of academia, not all of them had negative impacts. Some of them were absolutely able to assimilate back on their own, but that doesn't mean that that's the case for everybody. I hope that answered your question. Samarine or
Anthony
yes?
has his hand up, so
Oh, I'm
maybe we
sorry.
should put this one. Anthony?
Yeah, I'm a post 9/11 combat disabled vet, and some people just don't want to be identified as that, right? Because, I have 6 combat deployments, and you might not be able to tell, but I'm 100% service-connected disabled combat vet. And some people just don't want to be identified as that because that's the past, right? So, and then there could be some assumptions that people have a successful military career in college, and it might not be the case, so they don't want to talk about the military, right? So, I think treat everybody the same way as they would want to be identified, just like pronouns, the same concept would apply in that specific situation, because sometimes being identified as a veteran gives unwarranted advantages or disadvantages with people. Because I was in class in the beginning when I first started going class, and people didn't like that they were talking negatively about the military. And I've also been in some situations to where people were praising the military, and then it gave those people an unfair advantage. So it's sometimes just some people just want to be identified as a student and just be in the general population. I think the correct thing would be is to avoid stereotypes about trauma and combat, especially because everybody hasn't experienced that.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Anthony, for bringing that up. There is definitely still a stigma in veteran status. It very much reminds me of a student who might not want to be identified as a disability resource center student, right? They might need accommodations. It might look like it's unfair treatment because you get priority registration or you get XYZ, insert here. Veteran status could absolutely be similar in that regard, not exactly the same, of course, because everyone has their own circumstances and life experiences, but in relation to what you're talking about, that's absolutely true. And being respectful of the identity and the intersectionality of our identities, because there have been occasions where when working with students, I did not see any types of indication or any student affairs information on my end that I could see that they were a veteran status, and then they would disclose to me that they were a veteran. And so working with this population, it is very, you need to be culturally sensitive as well as sensitive to their situation. So sometimes students, dependents, or spouses of veterans, they don't want that support, and sometimes they do. But it is important for us to recognize the respect that's needed for their identity that they're wanting to either conceal and or just go by, just like you said, a college student. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, I just wanted to add to that. So I'm also a post 9/11 veteran, and a lot of times with female veterans, it's not something that you would that's not the first thought that comes to your mind. And so I do appreciate that Anthony put in there, just respect the identity. So I think even with that, I also have my own personal experience. So also transitioning out of the military, I did not identify as a veteran right off the bat. I think there's also a sense in that transitioning where you're looking at also like the Schlossberg transition theory, where there's also that part of the going in and right, and then going through it, and then also coming out of it. which is also very important because they're trying to almost having to reinvent themselves and their identity and trying to discover like what's important to them and understanding like who they are as a person. But I think it's really important that even if they don't identify, that they're also equipped with the information and the resources that are available to them, even if they don't want to utilize it. Because that's where a lot of the disconnect happens and a lot of the stigma, the stereotypes that come along. It's just like working with veterans that have service connection disabilities. We can provide them the information to their disability offices and their campuses. However, it's up to them if they want to go and utilize it and disclose, any of that information for them to have those accommodations. So I really just wanted to say, like, point out, I wanted to say, just respect our identity, which was that's a really big statement right there.
Keisha?
Yes, I just want to point out that I think at some institutions, it may not be an option once you're enrolling. Like I know at SC, like they label in the database special populations, like if a student is a student athlete or ROTC. There used to be years ago, I believe for veterinarians, like for that to be labeled too. But we have this new system now, but I did want to point out that some universities automatically, assign you as like a tag on you. So like when you're working with an advisor or any other staff member, they can, see that. And then it's kind of like, it helps me like identify what type of students I have, but then also I think others can kind of come up with their own assumptions about the student. And so I think that's when it's kind of like some institutions just kind of like out of your hands. Like even if you want to withhold that information, they automatically tag you immediately as soon as you're, a student enrolled.
I can't speak for private institutions, but California Education Code does allow people to withhold that information. They just have to knowingly sign off on forms and then submit that, whether anything else relevant, like a DD 214, for example, if something like that, any type of paperwork that was coming from the military, if it comes into the system, Khadijah, you're absolutely right. I can see if you were tagged because you were a foster youth next up, you're an athlete, and you were a DSPS student, I can see all of those when I pull up your profile, right? Like I'm not going to disclose that I can see that to a student, but I'm not sure how the private sector works, but yes, in California's public systems, that's automatic unless you do know that you have the right to file and get that removed so that no one can see that, or it's listed as confidential so that if you don't legally have the rights to look at that as a certain tiered employee, it would be blocked from your system.
Let me ask you this question. So we're talking a lot about student agency, which I wholeheartedly agree with, that if students don't want to be identified as such and they refuse to access the resources that we provide for certain groups of students. But if you are informed practitioners and you are researchers and you read a lot of research, and which from the research panel that we have discussed how this would be beneficial for those groups of students, right? If we have that information, do we just leave it entirely up to our students to make the decision as to what resources would be beneficial for them? Or do we, as professionals, experts, and as a student support personnel, do we intervene and do we have some say as to what students should access and how they should access? And should we, find a way to help our students to change their minds to some extent? If not, of course, it ultimately is student choice. Okay, I'm not saying that we have to really impose this upon the students, but do we have some say? Because this is very different. We're talking about higher ed. These are adults, and versus K through 12. I mean, as educators, we have a lot more say as to how we can do this. But I'm constantly troubled as somebody who knows research, right? And we know this would be really beneficial. We know that from statistics. We know that from research findings. How do we do this? How do we manage this? And I see a couple hands, and Tadesha, why don't you go first? And then Dana next. I'm kind of in between, and I only say that because I experienced both sides. So one, me being a former student athlete, I personally, like, for someone who's trying to, like, come and have their own identity outside of sports, so that my professors won't, have these, stigmatisms, like, about me and what I value and things like that. That's kind of like where I wish, I wasn't, I didn't have that tag, or, I would even try to dress differently in the classroom because I didn't want to, be seen. Well, I just wanted to be seen as more than, playing my sport. But then as an advisor who's, been in this space for over 10 years, sometimes those tags help me when it comes to analyzing data, and if I'm assigned to a certain population, like for me, like I am the liaison for athletics within advising. So for me, that tag helps to ensure that I get my students in earlier than, the rest of the, student population, to ensure that, because I know that they have time sensitive schedules, their schedules are a bit, complicated, providing them with appointment availability a little bit earlier, just because I know they have priority registration and so forth. So, but if they didn't have that tag, it would be very hard for me to identify, and plan in advance for that. And so that's why I say I can see like the administrative side to things. But then as an administrator, I've also been in places like where I had other staff members automatically assume things of students because of their tag, like, oh, like they could have, health complications because I have this. I'm like, did they display that? I'm looking in their notes, like, was there an experience you had with the student for you to come up with, this assumption? And it's like, oh no, but they have this tag assigned to them. And so it's kind of like I'm in between, because I know also for admin, if we need to get funding or ask for certain resources, if we're able to say, oh, we have this X amount of students who are experiencing difficulty navigating X, Y, and Z, but if they don't have that tag, then we can't, showcase that. And so that's where I'm kind of in between in a sense, because I experience both sides. Yeah, so I guess the implications from what you are sharing, Tadesha, is that maybe like provide the safe space for the students to disclose, their identities in the most transparent, way as much as possible for them to be able to like get the support or talk about, and so in your case, then the tag really helped you down the road, you said. But at the beginning, students might not know, and I'm not saying disclosing their identities that they do not want to disclose is always beneficial. I'm not saying that, but I think that having that option for the students and seeing the benefits and making the decisions based on, you know, what they know, I think that would be really important. But at the same time, we want to respect their identities and what, but still, like sometimes students, they need more information, and they're students, so they might not know everything about, what's more beneficial, and we want to advocate for them, right? Dana, you have your hands up.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to I was at a president's council meeting, and a few of my colleagues disagreed with involving students in decision making. And
Yeah.
they have their points, respectfully, but for me, it just didn't sit well because we weren't producing the results. We've tried it that way over the course of the years, and so I think a collaborative approach in working with students. I think it kind of goes back to the student is the consumer. I know we don't like to talk, business and collab, we don't like to talk money when it comes down to students, but it ultimately that's who we serve. So I do agree that on a practitioner standpoint, we have a role to play in making certain decisions and policies as it pertains to how operations work. But when it comes down to our students and how we service our students, they are considered stakeholders. So it is important that we work with them. It is important that we get their feedback. It is important that if we have a veteran population and, let's say how we're having this conversation now, I would want to get surveys out for internal usage to be able to decide. Ultimately, when we're sitting at these tables, we're not using student feedback, honestly. We're using data we're collecting in other areas
Right.
to better make informed decisions, but we're not really using the student data. And I think that's what's important. And that's what I've been trying to change in my current organization, is that let's try some new ways of focusing on bettering just bettering, I guess, the student experience. I'm still going to focus on student experience. So I feel like it needs help. So that's just my take on it.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, just having a course evaluations or just informal feedback, I don't think it's enough for us to hear from the students' perspective. So there should be a variety of different ways to involve students and get their perspectives in everything that we do in education. Ernest, you have a hand up. Take it away.
So I feel like all four S's are being like evaluated with your comments tonight, and now it makes me want to go back and look, and then even with Khadijah's contributions, because it's a fine line to walk when someone doesn't want to be associated with something that that they're tagged with, correct? And so knowing the situation, knowing what types of support, that's why we really wanted to go with the buddy system, the camaraderie that's built within a networking system that's already pre-existing, because the military, no matter what branch, it connects veterans, right? And they might not agree with that. I've had veteran students who've made that comment, but it still tethers them. They were in service at some point, and that creates coping strategies that they can come back to together, and then that allows them to look introspectively at their own self, right? But going back to what Khadijah was saying, like looking at how what you're asking is, where's that line to where we intervene? And like Dana was saying, because at the end of the day, we are a business. We don't want to be looked at it that way. We don't want to say it out loud, but we are. And the student already paid for the long-term service that we're supposed to support them with, right? In student services, I look at it as, my sister works in Nike. She works retail. It's a fast transaction. You want a shoe? Here's a pair of shoes. She's done. I have a much longer customer service perspective, because the student starts the semester and my job is to make sure that they finish the semester successfully. And so I have to, in that in between, throughout those months, make sure that I'm maintaining them, retaining them, and sending them out. So in addition to that, I feel like when I know a student who might be a foster student who's not wanting to disclose that, but they're about to age out of the system. The system's not in California built to support foster youth students forever. And so if I know that they're getting to that line, that's why I like to link them to programs like I linked inside of our group chat. The Student Success Coaching Program at UC San Diego has been really looked at. There's a lot of research on what it is that they're doing on a university level. If you have some time to look into it, but it's one-on-one coaching, it's peer coaching. So again, back to that buddy system, where if I'm a first year, I'm going to get someone who's maybe a second year to kind of show me the ropes. If I have questions about, where do I get library services after hours because I have an on-campus job, but this is my class schedule, they can help navigate. But again, it goes back to that veteran experience, which is why we really thought it would be the best for this research panel, because that it's built in for veteran students, whether they want to identify like that or not. For other populations, it's not. And so if we can take a note from these veteran students on how do they interact with each other, how do they build that camaraderie, and how do we posit that onto a different population that is not exactly veterans. And programs like that are really successful in making sure that not only are you meeting numbers, you're meeting quota, you're making sure your budget is spent on the things that they're earmarked for on a university level, but it really is that one-on-one interaction, so you feel safe. You can let someone know, I'm a disability resource center student and I don't know how to ask for that help. I've never been evaluated, or I have, but I don't know how to get my paperwork to that office. Do you know where it is? As simple as like, I am food insecure, and do you know where the campus food pantry is? That's the third largest UC at UC San Diego. So helping a student to navigate that institution alone, that could be a really good way for all of us to look at programs like that and how we can take that back to our own institutions. So I just wanted to plug, because my mother went there and was also a part of this program, and she also worked for them. So I have inside information that isn't always public, but it really did help me to ground and put my best foot forward when working with Submarine and Liz on this project. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. So your focus on the buddy system is good. And I mean, also, of course, I mean, this is no brainer, but just because we have a good mentorship program, some of the case studies that you've all looked into and buddy system, it does not automatically guarantee that students will access that or they'll benefit from that. How we, the educators, would design it and support the students through these programs would be really, really beneficial. But then again, because we're talking about systematic support, right? So we've been talking a lot about individual and agency and having grid, that's, it sounds great, but it's really individual. And we might be, discriminating those students who might not know how to do that and navigate the system, right? So how do we support them through the system, so that we can close the gap and make it more equitable? So maybe having like a buddy system, but buddy system how? It might look different, in different institutions. So maybe having that tailored to the specific needs of your students in your institution in a way that would really benefit them and support them would be really important. Something for you to think about as practitioners. And Anthony, you have your hand up. After Anthony, we'll go on to break.
Yeah, I'm gonna be really quick, man. I'm just gonna tell you I'm just going to tell you my experience with USC. Just navigating through the veteran process was extremely complicated. It was a lot, and even with me going on the campus and walking around and going to the resource center, I was getting a runaround. So I think that a really good way is that, if that person wants to navigate even just the enrollment system, it's a couple of extra steps, because if they're using post 9/11 or the Montgomery GI Bill, there's certain extra steps that they would have to do in order to do that. But I had to go to like 6 people to figure it out. So I think that, once you enroll, and even with the website setting up, I drove all the way from San Diego to USC to meet with the veteran person, and nobody was there. And then even making an appointment, they didn't show up. So it's like a lot. So most people would be discouraged for going to the school just because of their initial experience, because military people are very structured. And if it's not, hey, how do I get from A to Z? It gets discouraging, because then it kind of sets the tone of how navigating the school system would be. So I think that even if it's just an SOP situation, to where here's your roadmap to getting enrolled, and then I'm gonna give you a student liaison that's a veteran that's gone through the program, maybe that's in their second year, to meet with the students, even through orientation, to just navigate that person through it. I think because the culture is extremely different from being structured. Now, I have a little bit of leeway because I've been out of the military since 2016, but a person going directly from the military to coming from the military to USC, Rossier, it was horrendous.
Oh,
You can ask
no.
any veteran on here; they'll tell you the exact same thing.
I am so sorry to hear that. I mean, we do have like a faculty who was veteran, like who got hired a couple of years ago, Dr. Phillips, and we're making an effort to like try to hire somebody who would be able to support and empathize with our students, and but still we have a long way to go. And thank you for sharing that concern, Anthony. Um, let's take a break, 10 minutes, everybody, and come back to do some more deep dive discussion around these topics. Hi, everybody, welcome back. So we're gonna continue on with our discussion around the transition theory and the class, social class. So I do have these example survey questions. We did talk about how to involve students and get their perspectives, and I think we're hearing that all the time when we talk about student support in higher ed. So let's just say that you have these questions in front of you to distribute to your students. Are these good questions? Or is there a way for you to word it differently? Like you want to word it differently. So like you want to revise them so that it is more these questions are more inclusive, or is there anything that you would do to make it better? Any of these questions?
I think that just kind of looking at them, it's assuming. And so maybe instead of assuming that they've gone on a trip or they have multiple devices or any at all, or if they live on campus, asking them if they'd want those things rather than asking, like, assuming that they have already done that. I think that would be helpful to have a more organic conversation, because it takes the fear of responding that I'm too poor to afford any of that. Like
Yeah.
I think even just the thing that stands out to me most is the single room in the public institutions. Like I don't know that singles are still a thing, and if they are, they're like unicorns. Like you have to be like ultra wealthy to be able to get into a single. Like that's the epitome of like wealth in higher ed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
these,
these, I mean, information,
the
the
information that you collect through these surveys would be helpful. However, I mean, just like some of you had, I mean, also you and Ernest and some of your classmates have expressed in the chat, like Christopher, you said give social class, definitely. And Samreen, you said service learning needs to be defined, right? So for some students, this might be a new word. What is service learning? And Christopher, you also said I would feel othered. And Laura said, do you have any personal devices versus how many do you have? So this is like, just like what you said, Ernest, this is like you're making an assumption right there that you do have a device to work with. And, I used to have a student, I mean, she just graduated and she lived off of her car. Okay. An online student. And asking these questions would be, othering her too. And then, so maybe like having a more open-ended questions, um, and Tadesha too. Okay, right? Also like Josh, what is your living situation? So more open-ended questions and not including the assumptions. But as you review your survey questions, I mean, I know that I think I have given you some hints, right? So would you revise these questions? That's like a lead, right? But if you don't get those perspectives, these questions could be biased, or this could be potentially disadvantaging some of the students. I mean, you would take a lot of times, including myself, we would be taking these and we would be just distributing these questions as they are. But if you want to make it a little more, I know these are not perfect, but these would be better questions than the ones that I just showed you. So for example, as some of you had said, my your okay, this is blocking my slides. There you go. Have you participated in any experiences that expose you to different cultures or communities? So there are some examples, but you would be like, making it more like a open-ended, and you're not like giving certain choices, right? And so this would be better. So these some of the practical things we do on a daily basis, I mean, these need to be re-examined to make sure that it's not sometimes students don't want to answer, the question, or they feel like, oh, I don't fit into any of these examples. Or if you just ask them to do yes or no, I mean, I don't think there's an opportunity for the students to talk about their experiences and situations, right? So you have to really look at these carefully as practitioners. So that's like one of the things that I wanted to emphasize through the readings and research. Any reactions? So Christopher, you said that qualitative surveys are so hard to quantify impact. So Anthony, what could the university do to better help you navigate college life? So asking their perspectives, that I think this is really, use students' perspectives in a way that would benefit them rather than making an assumption and making it more like a yes or no question with very limited options from the perspectives of the institution. So yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead. Take it away.
So I kind of used to do this for Res Life when we needed students to submit surveys about their living experience in the halls. And some students, they would actually just sit down and do the full survey. But then some students actually did prefer the yes or a no. But then when we had longer questions similar to these, we kind of didn't get like 50% back for the surveys. And I think that's kind of like, I think these questions are better, but trying to convince students that it's beneficial for them and their experience and helping the institution is kind of like pulling teeth a little bit.
Oh yeah, yeah. So you really have to motivate them to complete them, and it's for you. And you're going to be learning how to design surveys and interview questions and for your dissertations too. And as much as you want to collect it, as detailed data as you can collect, and there's a practicality aspect to that. Your interviewees would not be able to stay on too long to answer your questions. And so all of these aspects need to be taken into consideration when you're designing surveys. And thank you for that perspective, Erica. This is so true. All right. So let's see. Other chat responses from Laura. Last year, when I conducted several layoffs and asked employees to return their work laptops, some share that it was the only computer they had. Yeah. That would obviously impact their ability to apply to other jobs. Exactly. I mean, all those resources, these are tangible resources, but intangible resources too. Has anyone tried word association surveys? Which word comes to mind about learning outside of the US? That's wonderful. I never tried that before, but I've heard of it. So Christopher, so it may be, I mean, this is not within the purview of our discussion of designing surveys, but we would need to really have that critical lens when we're reviewing the surveys or what we give out to students and what we offer to students in in the services. So the discussion leaders did a great job of comparing Bordeaux's versus the Yoso's capitals. And are you all familiar with Bordeaux's capitals? Everyone? Have you gotten the Bordeaux from any of your course contents yet? Okay. I know that our readings did mention it, but I think we're going to go over that. Okay, not yet. Thank you, Christopher. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that then. So based on what we know from the discussion leaders' wonderful, presentation, what do we know about Bordeaux's? We know social capital. We know cultural capital, right? So what do you think Bourdieu is trying to argue through his introduction of capitals? Any wild guesses? Samreen, want to give it a try?
Maybe one consideration is that academic achievement opens the door for changing your social class. So you're going to get more access to social mobility because you're able to really embody a lot more of these aspects of culture that's associated with a higher upper class.
Yeah, but are we providing that academic support equitably? That's a question, right? So
Yeah.
we are not. We're arguing that we're not.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
we are saying that it needs to be equitable, close the gap. Although, but if you do have access to academic support, then it increases the chance of being successful once you graduate. And so, yes, okay, that could be cultural capital. Thank you, Samreen. Josh, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to make the really basic point that he's using the language of economics and, financial wealth, which like is putting us already in a certain world and talking about all of these things in a different context than I think we often otherwise would.
Definitely economic and financial advantage. I mean, that's really like a basis. But the discussion leaders did a great job today to talk about how sometimes we're conflating, right? Economic capital with other capitals like cultural capital, social capital. Bourdieu says it's all very much intertwined, of course, like financial means as well as culture and social capitals too, right? But Bourdieu is essentially arguing that there are certain habitus. That's what he uses, the word habitus, right? Habitus is like a demeanor, like practices, disciplines, dispositions that people use to access those capitals, right? But certain people are born and raised with it because they have families who are, from the middle class and upper class, and they already, bring with them and use them to raise their kids, versus those students who have a mismatches, okay, between what their family upbringings are versus, what the mainstream America in our context is introducing to them. And some of you have discussed, I think it was your group, Samreen, breakout group, right, earlier about how dressing professionally, what does that mean, right? So it could mean different things to different people based on where you're coming from. Do we teach it? Do we not teach it? And I think that for the purpose of we need to recognize what they bring in. I mean, their cultural values but maybe introducing to the students being a little more transparent, right? So in this particular circumstances, these types of, dresses, for example, is more considered more professional. So as much as we don't want to teach the students to assimilate, assimilate, but we want to teach them to accommodate, so that we can empower them, so that there's like a differences and then be a little bit more transparent, right? So let me introduce you to like a little bit different capitals. So one thing Bourdieu is arguing is that it is really not possible for the lower class to be like upper class. It's very pessimistic. When I was first learning about this theory, it was very pessimistic. But being an educator, we want to make a difference, right? So, but Bourdieu's saying, as much as even though the people would have access to cultural capital, they would create something different so that there has a different tier of like upper cultural capital for them to remain their status quo, remain in power. So this is how system remains its own perpetuation of status quo. He calls how elites will continue tapping on those precious resources or capitals that others would not have access to, and they will make sure that they'll be the only ones who can tap onto these resources. So it's a very, in a way, it's very pessimistic, right? So let me, because Bourdieu is very, very foundational theory, and I know that some of you might be using it for your conceptual framework for your dissertation. I wanted to just make sure that I introduce this so you can explore further. And of course, if you want more resources, I'm happy to provide more resources on this. So one of the first things, I think the most important capitals of Bourdieu is cultural capital. So these are non-financial social assets that promote social mobility beyond economic means. So it refers to attitudes, knowledge, intellect, values, and language, and styles of speech, and dress, physical appearance. You know that, right? So we can tell. I mean, I know this is very stereotypical, and we talked about like not stigmatizing, and all of that. But this is how sometimes we view others, and through their style of speech, and physical appearances, abilities to primarily the middle classes. Schools often devalue the cultures of the working classes, unfortunately, right? And but this is in how institution, including education institutions, and we being the agents of the institutional power, we are sometimes reinforcing these values, okay, through the cultural capital. So the values, knowledge, cultural, so this power is reproduced through having the cultural values. So these are some examples of cultural values, okay? So it's a simple thing as like baseball versus golf, okay? Baseball is more accessible compared to golf. And let's say that, for the purpose of our discussion, many people, like many people enjoy golf. And everybody thinks that this is cool. And then this is going to be our new sports. And everybody will be watching, everybody playing it, right? Then the elites, according to Bourdieu, will create a new sports that they can access to. So this is like in theory, okay, right? So I'm just giving sports as an example, but we're talking about culture, we're talking about art, we're talking about many things. The ballet versus movies, right? Going to movies versus like going on and seeing an opera, okay, is very different. But they do place different values, and they have certain and I'm talking about elites, way of remaining in power through the cultural capitals. And it's not just that, it's certain variety of accents, certain variety of using languages. I mean, even though it is very subtle, I think that makes these very powerful because it's not tangible, it's very subtle, okay? It works hand in hand for them to be able to remain in power. Okay. All right. I see a lot of chat responses.
Dr. Min?
Yes. Go ahead.
So, okay, I struggle with this framework because I'm just going to use my affinity to the Black community. We use cultural capital in a different way.
Yes.
So it's a form of how connected you are to the authentic Black community experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you were going to go there. I saw your slides from earlier, but I really struggled with the examples of cultural capital. But then I had to zoom outside of my community, like, oh, we're talking about class.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So I agree with you, and because this is not really representative. Bourdieu is a French scholar, and he's coming from it is more of like a theoretical. And then there are a lot of research findings that have used Bourdieu to talk about a specific population. And I know that you're referring to Black communities, and there's tons of research on the population you're referring to, and YOSO, the discussion leaders have used the framework of YOSO today, and YOSO is saying something different, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. So I'm just saying the cultural capital. This is how elites they remain in power through the culture that they value. I mean, of course, going to the movies and seeing them operas to me is the same thing. It's just different modality of art, but they place values, right? And they make sure that they do that in such a way that such certain things are, it's not just American culture. It's just globally. Okay, I'm here in South Korea, and I'm all constantly in conversation with educators here, and they prefer to hire teachers who use North American accent. What does that mean? North American dialects. This is this more North American dialect versus like what Australian dialect, for example, but very different. It's the same language, but the dialect is in certain dialect is valued more in certain culture versus others, because North American dialect is considered to be like tied to the mobility, money, and class. Okay, for example. So we did talk about that. Social capital, we all know that, who we know matters a lot when we're finding jobs, going on to different roles and experiences. And so we as an educators, we have been talking about how institutionally we want to provide social capital and cultural capital to students so that they have equitable access to these assets, right? So going back to the second question here, I'm not going to ask this question, but Yoso's community cultural wealth model, and we often call it CCWM, and I know many of my former students have used this particular framework as their conceptual framework, using an asset perspective. So I was quite pessimistic learning Bourdieu. I got my doctoral degree before Yoso's model came up, I think, where it was introduced. So Bourdieu is widely, and then it's how if we just perpetuate the status quo no matter what, and what's our role as an educators to make a difference. So that was and do we provide cultural and social linguistic capitals to our students as much as we can, and see if they can use their grit. So I was a little bit pessimistic, but there are a lot of researchers such as Yoso who are now saying, okay, we have to learn from how minorities are navigating the system. And there are, of course, students who have been successful, although we're not saying this, it's equitable, because there's a fine line between, systematic inequity versus individual, to define individual success, right? And then Yoso's community cultural wealth model, just like what discussion leaders have said, they have been using asset perspective. So what can the communities or individuals or groups can tap onto that are unique to themselves, just like what Christopher asked and brought to our attention. And we can encourage them and provide the support based on the asset they bring in. So it's not like, okay, the working class people, they don't have access, so we provide. It's like a deficit model, so to speak. But Bourdieu never said that, it's like we want to, this is how the system operates. That's his perspective. But we as an educator, when we're trying to use the model to practice, and we're kind of thinking of it as a deficit model. So then cultural wealth model. So how do we use that? So this is like an example of what the discussion leaders have introduced. I'm just going to allude to them briefly. Aspirational capital. So the ability to maintain hopes and dreams for the future, even in the face of real and perceived barriers. So even though there are barriers, and many of you have multiple responsibilities, but you want to get doctoral degree, okay? Because you do have aspirations and you have goals. Maybe you have multiple different objectives and agenda, right? So you're making the financial and time commitment to study, right? So there's an aspirational capital. How can we as an educators motivate our students to do this more and better and use what they bring in as their aspiration and goals and maximize it, okay? That will be our question. Linguistic capital, the intellectual and social skills attained through communication experiences in multiple languages or language styles. So it's not just talking about dialect, different types of accents, but we're talking about different languages. Can we make sure that the students, for example, our international student population, they might be a little bit discouraged because English is the medium of communication, and they might not feel that I don't really, have a fluency in this language enough to participate and be leaders in this particular context. And how do we promote the linguistic capital so that they feel like, oh, I'm multilingual, I have a lot to contribute, right? Familiar capital. The cultural knowledge is nurtured among family, the kin, that carry a sense of community, history, memory, and cultural institution. There are a lot of things that you learn from your siblings and from your parents or cousins. You know what I'm talking about. Your family network, and they're essentially your social capitals. But then again, I mean, they can be your role models, and they give you this practical guidelines. Sometimes they encourage you. You're the first one in the family to get a doctorate or get a college degree, right? So you do have all of this support from family, and that allows you and that prompts you to do what you do now, right? So that is something that other students, even though you're coming from upper class, might not have. Right. For example, like some of the families that I know, including my own family, like getting a college degree was like it's something that you have to do. I mean, it's not like it's my youngest sister. She was not really interested in academics, for example, but being an Asian family, because going to college, you have no options, right? So it's like in that case, it's like you're not getting that aspirational capital. You have to do this because you have to do this, right? So, and a familiar capital, I mean, she's getting examples from all her siblings, but then again, I mean, so she learning something that would really help her plow through. Social capital, the networks of people and community, resources upon which people can draw upon for emotional support, information on their needs. And we know the importance of this. I think that we have made quite a bit of a stride when it comes to helping first generation students, for example, because we hear that all the time. I mean, there's a long way to go, but I think that we're making a stride based on the research findings on how to help first gen students. But social capital is something that that those students and other students who are in a lower or class or marginalized status lack. So it's something for us to work on. Navigational capital, the skills and abilities to maneuver through social institutions now created with communities of color in mind. So how do we fit in, even though, I mean, they might feel like, oh, I'm other, I'm not really, I don't feel comfortable being here, but but sometimes they navigate through the system and they rise and they become examples, okay, for others. So how do they use the navigational capital and what we can learn from their experiences, and we can, as institutions, we can help build that navigational capital for other students. Resistant capital, the knowledge and skills fostered through oppositional behavior that challenges equality. Okay, so how do we really help them say no and call things out and seek support and they advocate for themselves and they protest. So there's many different ways for us to really encourage them to tap onto the resistant capital too, according to Yoso. Okay, and we do have, these are some of the specifics. Just gonna go through navigational capital. Okay, so navigational familiar terrain, and then see leveraging social networks, building resilience. And we talked about resilience and how the readings have talked about resilience is very individual, right? Individual concept, and how it could be really damaging students if we just blame on students. You didn't have resilience, you didn't have the ability, right? So, but building resilience and helping cultivating the ability to persevere and thrive from the perspectives of those from the system, okay, not just on individuals. I think that will be really helpful. Adaptability and problem solving ultimately. Okay. Reactions or questions or comments on word use capitals and aspirational capitals. even though Bourdieu's capitals might be, it doesn't really apply to my context, or it is too like maybe pessimistic, but it's very foundational. And a lot of recent researchers have been using his ideas of capitals and kind of making it into a new concept, revising it and applying it and talking about that. So that's why it's important for us to learn about the foundational theories. Any questions or reactions, comments about any of the things that we talked about? Have you been using navigational capital or aspirational capital in your life? I know that many of you had, right? So it's more asset based. So the focus should be how do we build, not put place a burden on individual students, but how do we help the students? So one of the things that Ernest group talked about, like partnering with other students, right? And I think having a buddy system, having a mentorship program, that would help with all of these capitals too. But doing it in a way that's meaningfully done and also executed in a way that's so that you don't just automatically place students and work together and it's not going to work, right? So how do we monitor and also give feedback and get feedback from students and encourage them to work together in a way that's productive? All right, I wanted to introduce to you one more conceptual framework. I did mention that a couple weeks ago. Called Brenner's ecological system theory. Have you heard of Brenner?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some of you. Okay. So Brenner, I just wanted to briefly introduce this to you because you'll get this because I've been getting a lot of these as the conceptual framework on dissertations that I get from students. So it's just very. I don't want to say this is simple, but I think it's easier to understand. So Brenner's ecological system theory posits that human development is shaped by interacting environmentally. So ranging from immediate settings like family, microsystem, school, family, neighbors, friends, work. And you see that there in the inner circle of this, infographic. And it highlights how individuals and their surrounding environments mutually influence each other across 5 nested layers. So microsystem and mesosystem is a relationship between 2 or more microsystems. So parents and teachers communicate can directly impact a child's academic success. So school and family, right, for example, work together in mesosystem, right? And the exosystem, social settings or external environment that do not directly involve the person, but still indirectly influence their development. So for example, the students, maybe the parents, economic or financial status or their stress, could impact the students' well-being or their motivation to do work in school, for example. Macro system is a broader and more macro, so overarching cultural values, societal laws, economic conditions, some of the things we talked about already, like cultural capital, and those other capitals will fall under macro system. So chronos system has to do with time, okay? So life transition, something that we talked about already from the discussion leader's presentation, the transition, right, theory, the 4 S's, right? So historical events, like more major life transitions, a move, parents divorce, things like that will fall under, and in time that progresses since then, chronos system. So this will be another conceptual framework that we might want to refer back to quite often to talk about all of the theories that we are going to address in our class. So, individuals, and it's not just individuals, not, they don't exist in vacuum, right? So we know that they interact with environments, and talking about these different layered environments is a contribution of Grafenbrenner's theory. Okay. A lot of times when I see dissertations, and I see that students and the scholars, they have been using the Grafenbrenner with other theories in conjunction, and they create their own concepts that would, influence and impact your particular population. Questions? No question.
I don't have a question. I guess I do have a question. So I'm a little stuck on Bourdieu still. I've been stuck on him. I have a double major psych soc undergraduate degree, and theory is like the foundation. Like I had to take 2 7-unit theory classes, a classical and a contemporary theory class for my sociology degree, not to mention the theory in psych. Like Bourdieu reminds me of Karl Marx 100%. Like I feel like they build off of each other. Except Karl Marx mostly focused on economic capital, to discuss the division of labor, the proletariats, the bourgeoisie, and it's very much what you're talking about here. But I didn't have time to go back in and look at some of the material I've kept on Karl Marx. But did he build off of him? Do they come from the same timeline?
Very much so. Yeah. Karl Marx and economic, aspects of Karl Marx is very much, they influenced each other a lot, and especially Bourdieu was very much influenced by Marxism, and coming from French environment, and Bourdieu was very much interested in the bourgeoisie and working class, and how those bourgeoisie would be remaining in power, and very much so when it comes to Marxism too. So so Marxists talked about how they would be remaining in power, and how working class will be constantly being used by bourgeoisie, and there's limited resources. So they do share those perspectives, and I know that Bourdieu was very much influenced by Marxism. Is that your question?
Yeah, because what I feel like a lot of the theories that you're introducing, for me, what I think what I'm trying to centralize through all of them and find that through line is how they impact, a lot of what I heard in our discussions today, I think was very rich for me, and I'm very excited to go back and review my notes after today, because I feel like a lot of it goes back to the systematic inequalities and systematic structural issues within higher education start with the student. But like Samarine's room was talking about, it moves into career and workforce development. And so if some people are ahead and some people were lucky enough to get through and to navigate and have this aspirations to persevere and get that degree, whatever degree or certification that might be, to have a higher probability to move up in terms of social mobility, they're still navigating the entire time because they are in a system that wasn't made for them. And so if all of these theories are basically telling us that what's really wrong with institutions is not the institution, it's the people who run them. And so if we can't identify the cracks in the system as the populations of people who are keeping those down versus those who are promoting up. How do we do that with these theories? And so is the purpose of being introduced to so many theories in this class to help us understand where to take any one of them or multiple of them into our dissertation?
No, you don't have to use any of the theories to your dissertation, but I'm just introducing theories, and I'm highlighting some of the theories because I see that as like a foundational, meaning like a lot of other researchers have used their theories to their own research practices. So, and also like, my other students have used it, for their conceptual framework. So maybe, it's really seminal pieces. So it's worthwhile looking at it because it's foundational in a lot of branches that you can do with it because it's very like high level theories. And of course, some of the discussions we've been having is like, how does that apply to my particular research participants, right? So one of the criticisms that Bourdieu gets is that his theory is not generalizable, something that we talked about, but then he presents it as if it is generalizable, right? So then a lot of the things that recent researchers have done is, this is not true. There are people there who have been using their own forms of capitals, right, to be able to be successful, okay, in this particular context. We understand that there's inequity, like in the system. There's certain people who remain in power and they continue to be, they'll continue to be remaining in power, right? But still, like, how do we help our students then? What's our role? Is for us, I think that it's important for us to help close the gap, right? So how do we close the gap if we are unable to close the gap completely, right? Then we need to close the gap as much as we can. Then we would be providing a lot of avenues for our students to tap onto as many forms of capitals that we included in our discussion today. Yoso's capitals as well as Bourdieu's capitals too. Right? And I think the one of the most important thing is for us and educators and also for our students too, like that we serve, to understand how the system operates. Okay, and how those people who remain in power continue to remain in power. Okay, and how can we challenge that as a group? We can't do this individually, but how do we form a coalition? We talked about that. I know, Ernest, you talked about it. Forming a coalition. How do we do that so that we have a critical mass to be able to challenge the power in the system, and so that power is shared more equitably. Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you for that. Any other question or comments about this?
I just wanted to make a comment. I think, Ernest, you said something along the lines of like the issue, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this is what I heard. The issue is the individuals, not the institutions. And I think that it's the opposite, that I think we're using the institution to say that like this is it, right? The laws, the policies, the rules, like that is it. And I think what I'm gaining from this course and our program in general is really like, how do we navigate that paradigm shift in how we think about the systems, how we think about the institutions, and how we challenge it? And at the same time, how do we nurture student development as they navigate these systems that were not built for us?
Thank you.
And I think it's tricky because I think that one very simple example in our breakout group was around this definition of how do you define professional attire when the whole concept of professionalism is based on like the white male standard, right? And so like how do we sit down and have those conversations with students about like, hey, like this is what your employer is expecting you to look like. I understand that it is not fair. It may not represent you and your culture and who you are, but how are we navigating this together? So I think it's really complex, but I think for me what I'm gaining from it is the paradigm shift, and like how do we have those conversations with students and our colleagues to help challenge those oppressive systems.
Yeah, thank you, America. And one other example before we call it a day. I mean, I know that from last semester you all talked about meritocracy, right? Meritocracy is like a popular thing that I think American education system sells. If you do well in school, I mean, increase the chance of being successful once you graduate. But it's such a myth, and I think it's a powerful myth that perpetuates the status quo, right? And it's sometimes that we as an educator, we're being agents to sell that propaganda to our students. You do this well, and you'll be able to do well, right, later on. But it's not actually the case. It's the concept that legitimizes the inequity in our system. So you're not doing this well because it's on you to do well. You have to have the grit. You have to have the perseverance. You have to have the academic ability. Look at you know Asian doctors, for example. They're successful. And I have, from my research, I know that there are a bunch of Asian doctors who wanted to be politicians. They wanted to be entertainers, but they were forced to be, doctors, because this is what the society tells them, and their family tells them. So to some extent, this is the stereotypical image of how there is self-fulfilling prophecy, and this is we have that stories from our own like personal stories and professional stories, and this is an inequity. So we're talking about how we can help our students to challenge the system so that we have more equitable experiences and opportunities, but it's not easy. But the purpose is for us to understand how the system operates and how do we go about challenging it, and how do we help our students to be able to access the resources and be able to express their identity as much as they can so that they have a better chance of being who they are and being successful, right? That's the goal of, I think, education and our discussion, our course. We're 1 minute past, so I'm gonna dismiss the class. Thank you all, stay on. It was a wonderful, rich discussion. Thank you for the discussion leaders. Next week, we don't have a class. I'll be here though, but the following week, we do have 2 research panels and 1 discussion meeting. And you know who you are, right? Please send me your rough ideas before the class that week. And if you have a question, of course, I'll be here to help you. So thank you, everybody. See you in 2 weeks if I don't see you next week.